the Bible, God, and Jesus. If you have any questions about them, we're about to explain them all and make it easy to understand. We're going to go through the whole Bible, but this time we're going to focus on the Gospel of John, which is a book that is written about the life of Jesus, and it focuses on who Jesus really is. This Gospel was written by John the disciple, which was also an apostle and the loved disciple, as it is mentioned in the Bible, because he was very loved and very close to Jesus. He is the one that you usually see reclining his head in the painting of the Last Supper, because he was very close to Jesus. Now, this gospel is written by John himself in the year 8025 AD, it is believed, which is about 50 years after Jesus died. This gospel is different from the other three gospels, which is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because it is the only non-synoptic gospel. This means that it is the only gospel that really focuses on who Jesus really is, instead of mentioning the brief summary or outline of Jesus' life. So you are going to see many dialogues, Jesus talking to his disciples, Jesus talking to Pharisees, people that hated him, how they responded back to him, and how he responded back to them. And this gospel does not mention these topics. The birth of Jesus in Bethlehem, or his youth in Galilee, the temptation that he faced in the wilderness for 40 days, the transfiguration, or the parables, or demoniacs when people were possessed by demons, or the fall of Jerusalem. But this gospel is the only one to mention Jesus turning water into wine. It claims that Jesus' ministry lasted 3 years, because it does mention 3 times or 3 Passovers that Jesus attended to in Jerusalem. This gospel mentions raising Lazarus from the dead, and Nicodemus, which was a Pharisee. Doubting Thomas, which is the apostle that didn't really believe when Jesus resurrected, and he had to touch his hands, the holes in his hands because of the nails, and his side, which was speared, and the I am statements, which is when Jesus referred to himself as the I am, which is the God of the Old Testament. It is the only gospel that mentions the washing of disciples' feet, when Jesus washed the disciples' feet in the Last Supper. It also is the only one to mention the Samaritan woman at the well. And so, who is John? This John the disciple. He is, again, an apostle of Jesus. John's gospel is attributed to John himself. There is internal evidence. So you do see John referring to himself in this gospel, and external evidence. Other writers outside of the Bible also talk about John writing this gospel. John is the son of a wealthy fisherman called Zebedee, which is mentioned in Mark 1:20, and he is the brother of James. This is mentioned in Matthew 4:21 through 22. Jesus loved John. He was part of the inner circle, being there in the transfiguration. So Jesus allowed 3 people to be there when he transformed, and when you would see his full glory, along with Moses and Elijah in the mountain. And well, the disciples that were there with John were James and Peter. You see this mentioned in Matthew 17 and John 21. So the character of John, how was John? Well, he was zealous. He was impatient and intolerant. We see this in the Bible. Well, he was still good and, a fair Christian. And this is mentioned in Luke 9:54. Jesus entrusts Mary to John's care, and this is mentioned in John 19:26 through 27. John worked with Peter in Jerusalem as well after Jesus died. So when the disciples were working towards Jesus' ministry after his death, and this is mentioned in Acts 3. The external evidence about who John is comes from Polycarp. Polycarp was a bishop in Smyrna, and he lived from the year 69 AD to 155 AD. Polycarp was killed, martyred for proclaiming the name of Jesus. And Polycarp mentions that John made his home and lived in Ephesus in the year 70 AD, and that John wrote a gospel and 3 epistles. He was exiled to Patmos and wrote the book of Revelation in 96 AD, and that John died a natural death. The rest of the disciples were actually martyred. John was the only one who died by natural causes. Now, it is important to note that any external evidence, any book that is written outside of the Bible, might not be 100% accurate because it is not inspired by God. We as Christians believe that the Bible is the only work that is inspired by God fully. Therefore, in the Bible, you will find no contradictions at all.